All right, so let's go ahead and get started. It's 2 o'clock, so thanks for joining us this afternoon, and welcome to today's program about how Maine towns can reduce their energy costs by investing in solar energy. I hope that you and your families are safe and healthy during this COVID-19 pandemic that we're all living through. And we would have loved to have been with you in person today, but we appreciate that you've adapted and joined us on Zoom online instead. My name is Todd Martin. I'm the Grassroots Outreach Coordinator at the Natural Resources Council of Maine. NRCM is a nonprofit membership organization restoring, conserving, and protecting Maine's environment now and for future generations. For more than 60 years, NRCM has been protecting the places and the way of life that make Maine so special. We harness the power of the law, science, and the voices of more than 25,000 supporters across the state and beyond to protect Maine's environment. And our office is located in Augusta, just steps from the State House, which is where we do a lot of our work. Before we get started with our program, before I turn it over to our panel, just a couple of notes about this Zoom webinar that we're all in today. So the first thing is that the webinar is being recorded today, and tomorrow afternoon, you'll get an email from me with a link to watch the recording and to share it with friends, coworkers, and family. And we certainly hope that you will share it. Your video and your audio is disabled today by design, so you'll only be able to hear and see our panelists. But if you have a question for either of our presenters today, please type that question in the Q&A box, which you can find on the ribbon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers at the end of our presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Mills-Knapp from GPCOG and Karina Grader from SMPDC to talk about the growth of solar in southern Maine and in their region. So take it away.
Great. Thanks, Todd. Hi, everyone. I'm Karina Grader. I am the Sustainability Coordinator with Southern Maine Planning and Development Commission, or SMPDC. SMPDC is a council of governments serving 39 member communities in York County and Oxford County here in Maine. And we support our communities with economic development, land use planning, and transportation planning, among other services. And this year I was hired for a new position as the sustainability coordinator to help create a regional sustainability and resilience program. One of our goals of this program is to create a more collaborative network to share knowledge and coordinate efforts on sustainability and resiliency here in southern Maine, which is how we came to take part in this awesome webinar with the other great organizations here to talk about municipal solar in Maine. Municipal solar is a really big topic here right now at SMPDC. We've been assisting about a dozen municipalities on different solar projects, and we do that in a couple of different ways. On one side, with the Regional Sustainability and Resilience Program, we are helping municipalities who are exploring procuring solar energy for their municipal operations, whether that be participating in community solar farms or on-site solar. But then we also work with solar development on the other side through our land use planning program, where we are assisting municipalities who are being approached by developers who are working within their districts to go through the permitting process to get those solar developments approved. So to make sure that those developments are done correctly and that they adhere to municipal ordinances. So there's a lot going on and in southern Maine, and I'm looking forward to the rest of this webinar to learn more about what's happening throughout the region. And I'll pass it over to Sarah at GPCOG.
Thanks, Karina. Hello, everyone. I'm Sarah Mills-Knapp. I am the Sustainability Manager here at the Greater Portland Council of Governments, and very similar to SMPDC. We're a council of governments here in southern Maine. We represent 30 communities, and I also started recently in January as a Sustainability Manager. Our hope with our sustainability team and the program that we're developing is to provide our members with a broad array of sustainability services. You know, certainly supporting municipal solar is a key part of it, but really we're looking to, to provide technical support, to do support things like knowledge convening and knowledge sharing like we're doing today to help towns understand what the kind of best practices in areas of sustainability are, and also to provide research or funding support. We have a broad array of services that we provide to our members in sustainability. So, if I haven't met you yet, please reach out. I'd love to talk about what's going on in your town and support any solar that you have coming up, or if you have questions about it. We have a lot of communities that are, in varying places with developing solar, and some of them are going to be here speaking today, but also others, Cape Elizabeth, Cumberland, Falmouth, Gorham, Gray, Sebago. There's a long list of towns that I know that are working to bring some amount of solar into their towns. So we're really excited to be able to provide more resources for that, and looking forward to a great discussion today. And I want to thank NRCM for leading the effort on this. Appreciate it.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And Karina, if you can go to the next slide. So this is our agenda for today. I'm going to start with a sort of an overview of the solar policies that passed last year through the state legislature that have really helped many Maine towns make that leap to invest in solar. Then we're going to hear from Ben Axelman from Nexamp, a Boston-based solar development company, about who are these solar development companies, and what are they looking for, and who are they trying to do business with. And then we're going to hear from Julie Rosenbach, the sustainability coordinator in South Portland, about how South Portland was one of the first towns in Maine to invest in municipal solar. Then we'll hear from Nick Lund from Maine Audubon about best practices for siting a solar project in your municipality. And lastly, we'll wrap up with Gretchen Anderson from the town of Windham to talk about their solar investments over the years. Then we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers at the end of the program. Next slide. Great. So as I mentioned, I'm going to talk about the Maine solar policy, sort of past and present, where we've been with solar energy policy for about the last decade, and where we are today. So next slide. So just a quick intro to who NRCM is. So the Natural Resources Council of Maine, again, we're a membership-based organization. We have a staff of 30 based in Augusta, and we have a team of policy advocates who primarily do their work at the State House in Augusta, testifying on legislation, lobbying legislators, trying to pass strong environmental laws and defeat environmental rollbacks. We played a critical role in helping to actually write some of Maine's solar energy policies that have now become law. And as you'll learn later in my presentation, 2019 was really a banner year for solar energy policy at the residential, the municipal, the commercial, and the grid scale level. We're really seeing a tremendous growth in solar at all of those levels because of legislation that was passed at the State House in 2019. And NRCM formed a coalition of solar developers, solar planners, nonprofits, engineers, back in 2014 to work collaboratively to pass those solar policies. So we're sort of the policy folks and the conveners of Maine Solar Coalition. So that's who we are. Before I get any further into my presentation, I wanted to launch a poll question to ask for folks who are on this webinar today, who are representative of a town. How far along is your town in the solar planning process? Are you just researching the possibilities of municipal solar? Are you in contact with a solar developer? Are you going through permitting? Has construction started? Or is your solar array already operating? So just to get a sense of the folks who are on the webinar today, and I'll leave that open if you can go ahead and vote. All right, so I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So most folks here today are just doing some research, looking for some answers and some insight. So hopefully we can provide that. So next slide, Karina. So 1 second, that poll question just threw me off, apologies. So this graph is from 2016. So this is where we've been. Maine has tremendous potential for solar power, but in the past decade, we had fallen behind other states in the region and other places around the world who were enjoying the environmental and the economic benefits of solar energy. This graph, again, is from 2016, and Maine was in last place in New England for the amount of solar panels that we had installed. We were even behind New Hampshire for the amount of solar that we had installed. And this was a result of backwards solar policies for many, many years. And the LePage administration, gutting many of Maine's kind of landmark solar energy and energy rules, and just making it harder and less economically feasible for Maine residents, municipalities, and businesses to invest in solar. So in 2017, Maine's Public Utilities Commission adopted a rule change that gut net metering that eventually costs all Maine electricity ratepayers millions of dollars in implementation taxes. The PUC's net metering rules set Maine's solar progress back tremendously. And in March of 2018, utility companies began charging Mainers who had installed solar panels a fee for producing and using electricity that they were generating on their own roof. So we were moving backwards as solar technology was getting better and as solar prices were dropping. Maine solar policy was going backwards. So the next slide. So again, this graph is from about 2016. And in addition to having the least amount of solar panels installed in New England, Maine also had the fewest solar jobs in New England. I graduated from college in 2010. Many of my friends from college went on to work in the solar industry, but they had to move out of Maine to do it. They weren't able to work in the solar industry in Maine because Maine-based solar companies just weren't hiring here in state. So they had to move to New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, or even further away. So we were really missing out on a lot of economic opportunities and losing our young people because we just didn't have our solar policies right. Next slide. So before I get into kind of the policies that passed, it wasn't just the organizations like NRCM or Maine Audubon or the paid lobbyists or the legislators in Augusta that helped pass strong solar policy. It was the people of Maine. Maine citizens from all around the state kept coming back to Augusta year after year after year, especially during the LePage administration, to talk to legislators, to testify at hearings on solar bills, to lobby legislators on the floor of the State House. We could not have passed these solar policies that I'm about to get into without the help of hundreds of Mainers taking time out of their day to come to Augusta and lobby legislators. So they deserve a lot of credit as well. Next slide. So where we're going. So after years of backwards rules and years of inaction on solar, in 2019, the Maine legislature and Governor Mills enacted they acted to accelerate solar jobs and increase the amount of solar for Maine residents, businesses, and municipalities. Several pieces of legislation were enacted with leadership from both Republicans and Democrats. And solar legislation received broad bipartisan support in the Maine House and the Maine Senate from both Democrats and Republicans, because Mainers of all political affiliations and from all parts of the state spoke up in support. Next slide. So one of the very first things that the Maine legislature did in 2019, actually in January of 2019, was they passed a bill called LD 91 to restore net metering for solar customers, residential solar customers. So again, net metering measures the amount of energy that solar users are generating on their roof and providing onto the grid, and they get a bill credit for that energy that they're producing and putting back onto the grid. Net metering has made it possible for thousands of Maine homeowners to produce their own power using solar. Net metering is sort of the standard that's used all around the country and around the world. And passing LD 91 immediately after the legislature convened really helped sort of bring us back to where we had been before the LePage administration. Next slide. The Maine legislature also passed LD 1494 to update Maine's renewable portfolio standards. So now Maine is committed to get 80% of its power from renewable and clean sources by 2030 and 100% from renewable and clean sources by 2050. Today, right now, Maine gets about 40% of our energy from clean renewable sources. And this is, that's great, but we're still burning about 40% of our energy still comes from fossil fuels, including natural gas, which must be imported and are subject to dramatic price volatility. So, getting to 80% renewables over the next decade is totally feasible, and it's going to create tremendous investment here in Maine's economy and create hundreds of jobs. Next slide. The Maine legislature also passed LD 1711, and as a result of this bill, the Maine Public Utilities Commission is going to initiate a competitive process and work with communities and landowners to build about 250 megawatts of community solar. Each of those projects will be about 5 megawatts large, 5 megawatts. There'll be incentives to build these projects on previously impacted land like landfills or rooftops, which you'll hear about from other presenters today. And you'll also hear about solar siting guidance later today in the program from Nick Lund from Maine Audubon. Next slide. In addition, LD 1711 included a measure to design and build about 125 megawatts of commercial solar energy projects here in Maine. This is going to help Maine businesses reduce and stabilize the cost of energy to their business. Next slide. The real exciting thing about LD 1711 and why we're here today is that this bill really opened the door for municipalities to take advantage of solar. As you'll learn, towns across the state, like South Portland and Windham, Belfast, Lincolnville, Woolwich, dozens more, have already invested in solar and are saving money. What this bill, LD 1711 did was it allowed municipalities to get bill credits from solar arrays on not just one electric account, but to apply those bill credits to multiple accounts. And so rather than just being able to apply the credits to one bill, you can now power multiple municipal buildings and apply the solar credits to those electric bills as well. So that was hugely important and really opened the door to allowing towns all around the state to invest in solar. So that's the end of, those are the end of my slides. I'm going to turn it over to Ben Axelman from Nexamp to talk about solar development companies and what they're looking for here in Maine.
Sure. Thanks so much, Todd. I appreciate it. My name is Ben Axelman and I work with Nexamp. If you want to go to the next slide. Nexamp is a solar energy company that is based out of Boston. We've been in business for about 12 years at this point. And we have, we're founded by veterans and have grown into one of the larger developers, owners, and operators of commercial scale rooftop and ground mounted solar projects in the Northeast and nationally. Just to give you a brief overview of who we are. We have hundreds of solar projects operating on over 150 megawatts that we're currently that we are operating. And we are backed by a subsidiary of Mitsubishi. My talk today is basically to go through who are these solar companies that are active in the state, what is it that we're looking for in terms of viable sites, and how does that interact with with the local planning community of these communities. So if you want to go to the next slide, that'd be great. So there are multiple types of solar companies that are active in the market that have different business models and focus on different types of projects. There are residential, commercial or residential installers who focus on, putting a small solar array on your roof. There are commercial installers, which is kind of the wheelhouse that Nexamp is in, where we are building. I would group those projects in the 1 to 5 megawatt size, where you are tying into the distribution system and selling power locally. And then there are also utility scale solar developers out there who are looking to build much larger projects, 10, 20 megawatts, tie into the larger transmission system, high tension wires, and typically sell power out of the state, try to sell power to Massachusetts or Connecticut. There are also two different types of ownership models. One is the pure developer model, where you look to develop a project and then find some other company to buy it from you so that they can build, own, and operate it. And then there's an ownership model where the solar company looks to own the project kind of throughout the life of the project rather than flipping it. Both are viable models. Nexamp is more on the ownership side. In terms of how do we make money, there are multiple revenue streams associated with with solar projects. One is the development fee. That's mostly relevant if you're looking to sell the project. But the big ones are, we make money by selling power from these projects over the 20 to 40 year life of these projects. And there are federal tax credits as well that we can receive from the government. Next slide. So when we are looking for a good solar project, what is it exactly that we're looking for? Big ones are solar access. So does the site have access to the sun? Is it in a spot where there's nothing that's, large that is going to shade on the project? No, trees that you can't remove, or existing buildings or a mountain, things like that. What is the weather like there? Is it a spot that has, very heavy snowfall, which is going to reduce the solar output there? Environmental restrictions are also key. And so that's, it's the same restrictions that any development looks for. We need to avoid wetlands and endangered species and things like that. As well, grid access is key and is one of the major drivers of why solar companies are in specific areas, which is our ability to tie into the grid without, triggering really large, transmission level upgrades that will cost a lot of money and make the solar project uneconomical. Constructability is also important. That is, what is the terrain like? What is the soil like? Are you trying to build a solar project on the side of a hill where it's going to be a lot more expensive to grade it out? We would much prefer to build on a flat open piece of land without a lot of site work rather than trying to build it on the side of a hill. And then compatibility with existing land use is also very important. This is, what has the land been used for previously? Is it in a residential area with a lot of residential abutters, or is it commercially zoned? And that's one of the things that, we look for, because we're trying to develop good projects that will get through permitting and make everyone happy. And that's also something that's very critical for town planners to consider as well. Next slide. So what goes into a solar project? So in order to take a spot from, hey, that looks like a good spot for a solar project, to the point where we're actually, building and owning and operating a solar project, we need a handful of documents and other checklist items. One is site control. We need to have either a lease or a purchase option for, we need to own the land or have the right to build a solar project on this particular piece of land or rooftop. We need to have all of our permits. That includes local permits, which are typically through the planning board, as well as state permits that you may or may not trigger, such as triggering a site law permit if you're impacting more than 20 acres, triggering state level DEP wetland permits. There are also a handful of federal permitting triggers, often having to do with endangered species, Army Corps, that type of thing. We need to have approval from the utility to tie into the grid, and it needs to be at a cost that doesn't make the project uneconomical. We need to have our power sales figured out. We need to have all of the power being sold to either community solar off-takers or to larger creditworthy off-takers in a long-term contract so that we can finance the project off of that contract. And we also need to have we need to know how the project is going to be taxed, which is, an open question on a state policy level right now in Maine, but something that's, currently a hot issue. So I want to go to the next slide. I'm basically going to go through each of these items in a little bit more detail. So for site control, that can be either either we can purchase the land or lease it. Often we'll enter into a purchase option so that we can try to get all of our permits for the project ahead of time to make sure that the project is viable before pulling the trigger on purchasing the property. So typically that's a 1 to 2 year development period, either whether it's a lease or a purchase option. And then 6 months to roughly to construct the project. The project will operate for 20 to 40 years. And then we will typically have a bond in place and a contractual requirement to decommission the project at the end of its life. The last thing here is that what's important for us is that there's a clean chain of title. We need to make sure that that anyone who has rights on the property, has basically granted, like anyone who has the right to say no to a solar project on their property, has been accounted for in our documents. Next slide. So local permitting is very key for solar projects. Clearly, we are subject to town ordinances. Maine is a home rule state, so towns have a lot of flexibility on whether to approve or deny solar projects. Typically, this is either a special permit or site plan review through the planning board, sometimes the ZBA, typically the planning board. There are also state permitting triggers that can be triggered on these projects. And then we also have to ultimately receive building and electrical permits for rooftop projects. Typically, that's all you need. There's not typically a site plan review process for that because they're much more straightforward sites. Next slide. Interconnection is a big issue for these projects, especially in Maine, where typically solar projects are getting developed in more rural areas where there's not a lot of transmission infrastructure. So basically, we will submit an application to the utility saying, hey, we want to tie into the grid at this particular location with this much power. The utility can't say no, but they will do a study to determine what are the impacts of putting this much power on the grid right here, which can be impacted by the voltage of existing lines, load on the amount of electric power usage on that circuit, and other solar projects in the area. And then they will come back with a list of required upgrades that we are responsible for paying for, which can include equipment at the system, upgrades at the lines, and the worst one from our perspective is having to do upgrades at the substation, because that can get very expensive and can swamp the economics of the project. And then once the interconnection agreement is agreed to, then we pay it, the utility completes the work, and then they give us permission to start generating power and putting power on the grid. Next slide. So power sales is the main way that solar companies make money, so very important. There are multiple types of solar projects in the state. Like I said, there are residential projects where you're just selling to the house there. That's pretty straightforward. Larger industrial projects or utility scale projects that are trying to sell power into Massachusetts and get wholesale power pricing, that's relatively straightforward. A lot of the projects that are being proposed in Maine today, and most of the ones that my company works on, are the medium scale 1 to 5 megawatt size, where we're qualifying for net energy billing, and we are looking to sell net energy billing credits to either commercial or institutional, often off-takers who are creditworthy, which is often schools, towns, local businesses who were willing to buy the power for a 20-year contract, and lock that in so that we can finance off of their credit rating. The other is community solar, which is something that my company does a lot of, where we sell power to individual households and will basically offer them a discount on their electric bill if they subscribe. The type of customer is determined by both the rate that the project receives and by the solar program. There's one of the programs that was set up in the bill last summer enables these community solar programs, and that's something that's going to vary from project to project, but is pretty important. And lastly, how exactly these contracts are structured is important, especially when you're looking at this from a community solar perspective, whether you're looking at a fixed rate where you're paying X amount per kilowatt hour, or more common is getting a percentage discount so that you are locking in savings, whether or not the utility rate goes up or down. Next slide. That was it. So thanks so much. Happy to answer questions once we get there.
I'll launch right in. Hi, everybody. I'm Julie Rosenbach. I am the Sustainability Director for the City of South Portland. And I'm just going to take you through our journey of solar with our solar projects. Next slide. So we installed our first array in 2012. It was a 20 kW array on the city's Planning and Development Office. The building is tied in behind the meter, and it's also the excess energy was net metered to 2 other accounts. And at that point, we had a cost savings of 1 cent less than the standard offer rate. And this really allowed our city council to get comfortable with solar at minimal risk. Next slide, please. With that, we set our sights on a larger project. And it all started with a vision for what to do with our landfill. And for those of you who knew Tex Hoyser when he was here, it started with Tex's vision. Next slide. So in order to move forward with developing a solar array on our landfill, we did several steps. First, we did a feasibility study. And this was a 3-part study to look at the site feasibility, the electrical engineering, the solar suitability, and the financial perspective. And it was really sort of a cursory look at would solar work on our landfill site or not. The second thing we did was a geotechnical analysis. Would the landfill cap be able to accommodate a solar array without issues, and would the solar array pose any problems to the landfill cap? And so the geotechnical analysis came back positive, and we're moving forward with the project. And we realized that we needed to make some zoning amendments within our city, because previously solar energy systems were only allowed as accessory uses and were limited to 250 kWs. With this landfill project and the foresight that we would be doing many more landfill projects, our planning department just made zoning amendments to open up the possibility of zoning across our city. With all of those pieces in place, we issued an RFP for solar projects at select city facilities. We identified 8 municipal buildings, the capped landfill, and our Wainwright fields as possible sites. And we sent the RFP to every solar firm we could think of nationwide. 10 firms attended our mandatory pre-bid site tour, and we only received 2 proposals. This was in 2017. After initial analysis, and we left it open to figure out how to do this in an innovative way, we ended up rejecting both proposals. One of them was very innovative. It was tied to doing an ESCO, an energy services project, and using the savings out of that to fund the solar. And we had just done a couple of ESCOs and we were not interested in that. And the other was for a price point that just was not sustainable. So we rejected both of those proposals. And I sat down with my counterpart in Portland, Troy Moon, over coffee and said, we got to figure out how to put solar on our landfill. And he said, we got to figure out how to put solar on our landfill too. And so we came up with the idea of, what if we did both of our solar landfill projects together? We talked to Revision Energy and they said, that's a great idea. And so we joined onto their bid to say, let's build the exact same project on both of our landfills. So we didn't save money in terms of economies of scale on the panels themselves. Where we saved money was on the actual construction and mostly on the soft costs of designing contracts and legal fees and administrative overhead and logistics for both cities. By partnering on our projects, we were able to move them forward. We were able to save on construction costs and negotiate a lower PPA rate with Revision Energy. Next slide, please. But we still had to figure out how to make the economics of the project work. So this was in 2017 when they called the whole 8 years of the LePage administration the solar coaster, because solar bills would be introduced and pass out of committee and just not pass and be reintroduced, and everyone was trying to figure out how to get a really good functioning solar policy. So it was a difficult atmosphere, to say the least, to do our work. So there was 3 primary legislative constraints for our project. The system size was arbitrarily capped for landfill solar that's not utility scale at 660 kilowatts. The number of meters was limited to 10. And this is important because this really hampered, it made community solar not possible, because what you need for community solar is a large system size and a lot of subscribers to make it cost effective. But if you limit the system size and you cap the number of people that can net meter to, then it made it just non-functional. And finally, the thing that really made it difficult for municipalities was that all the kilowatt hours generated from the array were credited back in kilowatt hours. And for those of us that have lots of medium general service accounts, and large general service accounts, more than half of that bill is simply in a dollar amount, not in a kilowatt hour. So we weren't able to recoup our costs. Still our city council wanted to move forward with solar and figure out how to make it work. And so what we did was, I'm sure you cannot read this graph, but in the first 6 years, we agreed to pay a cost premium over grid scale electricity of around $26,000. In year 7, we would buy out the system. So we did this through a power purchase agreement. There's no upfront capital cost. We signed an agreement with Revision Energy. They constructed it, they own it for the first 6 years, and we had the option of buying it out in year 7. At that point, it would become cash positive, and the overall return on investment would happen in year 12. Even though in the short run, it was a cost premium, we moved forward because over the long run, we were expected to save pretty conservatively over $3 million. So I give you this project and I talk about the economics to show you what it was like before LD 17. Next slide. So despite all that, and with the costs premium in the first 6 years, we really wanted to build solar and commit to clean renewable energy. And so we got it approved by the council and built. And so this is just very fun pictures of the process. I'm really impressed with the fact that the prep work took a really long time to get the agreement, to negotiate a rate, to do our RFP. Once they started building this, it went up really, really quickly. Next slide. And it's fascinating to see how they worked with doing it on top of our landfill. So here's the almost final and then the final. And what you can see on this slide is just how much extra landfill space we have. And we built, again, the largest solar array that was non-utility size that we could at the time. So fast forward to 2018 and the city of South Portland. Well, just to give you context, at that point, the US pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord. And so cities around the country were directly committing to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, commensurate to the Paris Accord. And that meant we passed 2 overall climate goals to reduce community-wide greenhouse gas emissions 80% by 2050. And then really to show leadership and run all of our municipal operations on 100% clean renewable energy by 2040. So with these 2 goals, we set a more immediate goal of looking to increase South Portland's use of solar energy for municipal operations from 12% to 80% over the next 3 years. And I guess what I neglected to say was that with the planning office and our solar landfill site, we were able to generate about 1.2 million kilowatt hours a year and offset 12% of municipal and schools' electrical load. But once that was built, we said, oh, great, now we want to increase it to 80%. Given the council's really strong support for our climate goals and desire to accelerate our transition to renewable energy, and then given the legislation that passed that Todd talked about, LD 17, that really changed entirely the economics of solar, we moved forward immediately on 2 fronts. First, we released an RFP for installing solar arrays on site at city facilities again, and we limited the facilities that we wanted to see solar on, as we had learned from our previous RFP. We accepted 2 proposals back. One was to 2 new solar projects that you see here on our landfill. You see this one, I don't know if you can see my arrow, but there's one that's in addition to our existing solar array. And that was sized so that we wouldn't have to, size for the existing interconnection. And then we also sort of made a distinct project to build solar on our upper landfill that would have its own interconnection. So this was the first one, total system size of 3.6 megawatts DC, and the project would add just short of 10,000 new panels to our landfill and generate about 4.5 million kilowatt hours for the city. So this project brought us up to about 65% of our municipal load dedicated and offset by renewable solar energy. The second project that we accepted out of that RFP, if you could go to the next slide, it was a solar array at our community center. And this project is about I'd say a 163 kilowatts AC, mostly on the flat roof. But if you can see right here, it's a really steep pitched roof, and we have a few EV charging stations that are open to the public. And so we really wanted to show our leadership in solar. I should say that these rooftop and landfill projects are probably, they're not as cost effective as building solar in just a greenfield site, but our city council wanted to prioritize these locations. I think Nick is going to talk about the Audubon siting guides, and we put those into our RFP in both RFPs. So what it said was we'd like to prioritize rooftops, brownfield sites, and sites that are more ideal for solar. So again, these two projects, we did these, but we're signing contracts for these. They're going to both be power purchase agreements. They will save money immediately from day one and accumulate savings. And we expect to, one of our models is to buy the systems out after year 7 to maximize our cost savings. Next slide. So I don't quite expect you to be able to read this either, but I didn't really have a good visual for this. Once we had 65% of our load committed to solar and to have cost savings, we looked at the rest of our load and did a load analysis to see where else, how much solar could we offset additionally. And what we did was we looked at our number of accounts, the type of accounts, whether they're SGS, MGS, or IGS, how much each account has, what the upcoming changes we expect to have in our community, whether we're switching buildings or closing down a building or building a new building. And we said we could easily offset about 15% more of our solar. And because we had maximized sort of on-site city facilities, we did another RFP in 2020 for offsite solar. And again, this is where we said we would like the cheapest solar at the best value possible, but we would like whatever proposals we get to adhere to the Audubon siting guidelines. And again, Nick will talk about those more so that it's not just cutting down a forest to build solar. Next slide. So overall, what you can see is, oh, and I guess what I didn't mention was as we built the two new solar arrays at our landfill, we're tying them in with the existing array. The existing array in the old legislation, it made the most sense to tie the meter in behind our municipal services facility. With LD 1711, the 3 biggest changes that brought was being able to get monetary credits. So any amount of money you have on your bill, whether it's a flat monthly fee, a demand charge, or kilowatt hour charge, can be offset with monetary credits. It increased the system size to 5 megawatts, which enabled us to really fill in the rest of our landfill. And it has unlimited number of accounts that you can net meter to. So we could really look at using all of our city accounts to apply solar to. So that actually, the economics between LD 17 that was passed and the previous solar legislation meant at least a $50,000 difference in our existing solar landfill project. We were paying a premium of $26,000 because we could only offset part of our charges with kilowatt hours. Now we can offset the whole bill with monetary credits. The new landfill arrays in the first year are expected to save upwards of $120,000. Our offsite contract's going to save another $50,000. Our community center has much more meager savings, but it's savings right from day one. It's a great visual for the city. And so that our total first year savings when these are built, which we expect to have them all done in 2021, will be $238,000. And what you can see is that over the life of the projects, we expect to save nearly $20 million. And these are pretty conservative estimates. We use 1% for a utility escalator. And typically over the last 10 years, electricity prices have been increasing by 2.5%, but we weren't really sure what the market would look like. So it's pretty conservative. We get to offset over 80% of our municipal load with clean renewable solar and save a lot of money. And that's all I have.
Hey, everybody. Thank you. I'm going to pick up where Julie left off. We are really supportive of the work that Julie and South Portland are doing out there. And so now I want to talk about something she mentioned a couple of times, which is how to site these projects properly. So I'm Nick Lund from Maine Audubon. We are an environmental organization that's been around for a long time, working on behalf of Maine wildlife and wildlife habitat. We've been huge supporters of solar energy throughout our time. When our headquarters in Falmouth was built in the 1970s, we were on the cutting edge of green design, including some passive solar, and we've had photovoltaic for a long time. This here is a picture of some of the panels we have at our Falmouth headquarters. And we've still been supporters of solar energy throughout the past administration and through the Mills administration, and are excited about what's going on. But we know that Maine Audubon, our mission is to help balance the environmental benefits of solar energy, which are extremely clear and beneficial, with our mission to protect habitat and wildlife, right? Solar development is development, and construction, when construction occurs, then there could be impacts on the environment. Like Julie said, if we get into a situation where we're just cutting down trees to put up solar panels, we're not really maximizing the environmental benefits of solar energy, right? So how do we avoid that is what we think about siting. So next slide, please. When towns are considering developing their own solar installations, like South Portland did, they should put some effort into finding locations that minimize the landscape and environmental impacts. This here is a report that Maine Audubon released this past November with the help of NRCM and others, outlining how the state can take advantage of renewable energy while still protecting our wildlife. As part of this report, we created a solar best practices document outlining how to avoid and minimize impacts to the natural world and to natural and agricultural resources. Working with Maine Municipal Association, we sent that out to basically all towns in the state this summer. So if you're a municipal official watching this webinar, you may have received a big packet from us this summer, which included this report and some of the associated documents. If you did not receive that or your town manager didn't get that, I'm going to put the link here to the Maine Municipal Association website where you can get those documents right now. So those are the documents that Julie was talking about. And so what I'm going to do now is just very quickly run through some of the highlights, highlighted recommendations that we have in that report. So next slide, please. Number one, with Julie and South Portland as leading the way here. When you are looking to where you can site your solar, the number one thing you can do is use disturbed, developed, or degraded habitats, right? So if we're not taking up pristine wilderness to build these solar arrays, if we're using land that is already sort of out of nature, so to speak, then we're really maximizing the benefits here. So that includes, of course, landfills like the South Portland model. Other brownfields, which are properties that are difficult to develop because of chemicals or hazardous substances. Roadway medians, roadway edges, parking lots. Rooftops are perhaps the best of all options. Not quite as large as some other places, but putting them on a roof is that's the ultimate developed landscape. Other idle or underutilized industrial commercial sites, sand and gravel pits, places like that. Utilizing these places is just the best. Avoids new forest clearing, minimizes soil disturbance, takes advantage of unused spaces. So this here an example, this is a 4-acre project in Portland. I believe this is the sort of the partner project in Portland that Julie was talking about. This is at Dragon Fields, place I know as Dragon Fields, developed by Revision. Maine has about 1,800 acres of capped landfills, enough for about 250 projects of the size that you see here. Next slide, please. This is a gravel pit installation in Durham, New Hampshire, also done by Revision. So I'm just showing you some of the ways that this how this looks in practice. Next slide, please. This is a big rooftop project in the town of St. George on top of their transfer station. It's 67 kilowatt hours, but this is about 90% of the town's energy needs here for a small town like St. George. Next one, please. This is the Kennebec Sanitary Treatment District, which treats water for Waterville and Winslow, Fairfield, and Benton. 2,800 panels, almost a megawatt here, going down on some sort of unused space behind their transfer station. Okay, next slide, please. Number two, as you're going forward, so if you don't have a landfill in your town, you still want to try to do the best thing you can. So pretty simple: avoid and minimize impacts to sensitive habitats or high value natural resources. In this definition, we include all habitats identified as significant wildlife habitats under Maine's Natural Resources Protection Act, or otherwise sensitive. Endangered species habitats, rare plants, cold water fish, wetlands, eelgrass beds, focus areas of statewide ecological significance, and if possible, forested areas are places to avoid. Next slide, please. Some tools to help you locate these places. There are a couple. This here is the state of Maine's beginning with habitat map, it's called. This is a section for upstate. Also, Maine Audubon has a great Maine solar siting viewer that we launched this summer, which again, these are both GIS maps that allow you to zoom into your town and then add different filters showing different types of habitat, different ecological features, different developed features that can help you narrow down where you may want to be able to place your solar. Next slide, please. Very straightforward here. Avoid, if possible, impacts to intact forested landscapes. Forests are critical for a number of reasons. They provide habitat for animals, they provide passage for animals, they're carbon sinks. So, as we work on the problem of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, part of that is capturing the carbon itself. Forests do that. So we really don't want to, if possible, cut down forests to put up solar. It's sort of just a trade-off. Next slide, please. Minimize impacts by locating projects near existing development. So this is a connection issue largely. So if we put a project in the middle of nowhere, we may need to do other disturbance or construction to connect the project to the grid. So that can involve forest fragmentation or forest loss. And so we want to try to keep that in mind to the extent we can. Beginning with habitat maps help here. Although wildlife corridors are not mapped very well. So sticking towards the built environment helps here. And then finally, I'm going quickly because I know we've pushed on time a little bit, but finally, the next slide, please, is think about how you want to replant the vegetation around the project, right? So this is an opportunity to either restore or plant native vegetation. The areas, the low vegetation areas around your array can become wildflower habitat, native wildflowers. And so that's something to think about as you're landscaping your projects going forward. So again, Maine Audubon has resources for that. And also the link below to the Maine Municipal Association website has all of this information in depth. So that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. So I'm just going to jump right in and get started, just in the essence of time and making sure we have enough time for questions. But hello, everyone. My name is Gretchen Anderson, and I'm the Environmental Sustainability Coordinator for the town of Windham. If you don't know, Windham is in Cumberland County, and it's to the on the Gorham, Standish, Westbrook, kind of in that area. But next slide, and we can get started on where Windham officially started in solar. So the town's history of solar started in 2013. Our Energy Advisory Committee observed solar actually being utilized on a private property in an adjacent town and wanted to bring that to the municipality. So we ended up in discussions with Revision Energy and determined a power purchase agreement, similar to what Julie talked about, would be the best fit for the town. So that was signed in spring of 2013, and then the installation was completed in October of 2013. So again, from years 1 to 6, Windham was able to purchase power once cent below our market rate. And then year 7, we had the option to either purchase the system or continue to purchase power and the credits after year 7 at market rate. So we have since extended that PPA for 1 year to determine next steps. But the committee thought, this was such a successful project. Where do we go from here? And next slide, please. So how do we expand from this? So in May of 2014, we submitted a grant application to Efficiencies Maine's Renewable Resources Fund to implement a demonstration project at the town's skate park. So we wanted to do a car part structure mounted array, as well as a sun tracking ground mounted array. It would have been really cool, but unfortunately we didn't receive the grant funding. So we kind of had to go back to that drawing board of what is the next step for us? What could we potentially be utilizing as space to be implementing solar in town? Next slide, please. So we decided to go big. And so we were kind of in this holding pattern, as mentioned earlier by Todd and Julie, that, by decreased benefits and abilities until like 2018, 2019. So this is when staff started to explore the option of the cap landfill. So we were seeing the success that Julie and Troy were having in Portland and South Portland, and we're wondering if we could take that and utilize it on our own facility. So for some background, the town's landfill was operational from the 1960s to 1988 and then was closed permanently in 1992. It's actually located within a business park, and it abuts primarily businesses with industrial uses. It's also wooded on 3 sides. So this was an immediate benefit that council saw, in that it was, not in a residential setting. Again, solar is becoming more common, but it was, again, something that council wanted to take into consideration, as well as it's utilizing, previous dead space that council, we were just kind of sitting on. And it's, as well as simultaneously saving money for taxpayers, as well as diversifying our energy portfolio. The ability to say we are implementing these projects and taking part in Maine's willingness to use and utilize renewables. Next slide, please. So the town worked again with Revision Energy, who proposed a 504 kilowatt DC system on the landfill. The project consists of 1,344 solar panels arranged in 13 11-foot wide rows, so with 25 feet between each row. So as you can see from the original design in January to the final site plan approved by planning board in March, the basic design stayed the same. So in terms of our scheduling and planning process, it was pretty easy to adhere to, just because it kind of stayed the same. There was no ebbs and flows, which was, I would say, good. I think South Portland and Portland kind of ironed out those kinks again of the solar coaster that was occurring previously. We kind of knew what to expect, and the scheduling from the municipality side was pretty easy. Next slide, please. So it might be a little hard to see just because of the font, it's a little smaller, but I just wanted to lay out the timeline of what we saw as a municipality and kind of offering it to others as this is what you probably might be able to expect. Again, time frame, mileage may vary, but again, these are some of the milestones you could probably expect. An area of note is that the DEP permitting process took about 4 months, and that's just the way it goes. So just to plan accordingly. If you are meeting a certain deadline or you're expecting a certain schedule, just to be, have a line of communication open with whoever you are contracting with, if you are. Next slide, please. Okay, so the next couple of slides are going to show pictures of our ongoing process, because we're coming down to the wire and hopefully going to be wrapping up pretty soon. But this was on September 15th. And as you can see, so the total project covers 1.7 acres. And the solar modules are actually mounted on aluminum racking and ballast blocks. So the panels, racking, and ballast blocks are actually placed on 1 foot of gravel. So again, they're able to use these aluminum structures and then place rock within them. So it makes the installation pretty seamless for them. So not around this time, but a little bit earlier before, breaking ground, if you will. You don't want to break ground on a landfill, but the installation project Another tip we kind of identified during this process that I offer to other municipalities thinking about it is to make sure you triple check your deeds and right-of-ways. So the town originally, back when we didn't have the Enterprise Drive, we didn't have the industrial park, and it was the town landfill, we granted an easement to SAPI to actually access the utility corridor where that road actually was, as well as the right-of-way off that road. And we never terminated that easement. So they still technically had a right-of-way going through a capped landfill, which again, isn't a deal breaker. However, it created, preventable headaches during the planning process that we had to, meet with SAPI, terminate the easement. Just one thing that could be prevented. So I would, again, a word of caution, make sure you triple check your easements and make sure everything's buttoned up before you begin the process. But next slide. So from September 15th to September 18th, you're actually seeing panels go up. So again, the transition is pretty quick. So there was actually a total of 336 ballasted footings that were placed on top of the cover of the cap system to support the panels. And then the conduit is actually attached to the racking system and the ballast blocks where it's not buried under the cover depth. And then there's actually fencing around the perimeter, which is 3 inches above grade to give clearance. And it's we chose black just as for our design standards in Windham. That's what they had to comply with. Next slide, please. And then October 13th, which was just last week or the week before that. So again, we're coming down to it. We're nearing completion and we're very excited. So this project is projected to produce 682 megawatt hours each year, of which we'll be the off taker of. And this is going to offset 77% of the town's electricity costs, as well as, so when we have this, we utilize the PPA again for this project, as we have an option of a buyout in year 6. So if we purchase at that time, we'll actually be cash positive in year 14, which is currently the council's leaning towards. So we're very excited, and hopefully I'll be able to provide an update on first year pretty quickly. So thank you.
Awesome, great. Well, thanks, Gretchen, and thanks to all of our other presenters here this afternoon. And Karina, you can go ahead and stop sharing your screen, and we'll get into the questions and answers here. And if I can ask Nick and Sarah and others to jump back in here. So again, if anybody on the program has a question for any of our presenters, please type that question in the Q&A box at the lower ribbon of your Zoom screen. And we've got about 25 minutes for questions, so plenty of time. Ben, I'm going to pitch this first question over to you. Comes from Natalie, who asks, how much land does a typical 5 megawatt solar project require?
Sure. So the general rule of thumb is that it's about 4 to 5 acres per megawatt of actual solar panels. So a 5 megawatt project would be about 20 acres of panels. If the site is previously, wooded or has something else that requires a buffer area for shading, then there's more, space. There needs to be space around the solar array to, to avoid shading impact. So that can add a couple more acres, but that's a general rule of thumb. Great.
And Ben, just another quick follow-up question for you. Question from Kay, who asks, when will Nexamp's community solar projects in Maine start to produce power?
Yeah, so the first of our solar projects we're starting construction on shortly. We're hoping to break ground this fall, and with the goal of doing site work this fall. I think doing the rest of the panel installations when the snow melts in the spring, and then probably turn on Q2, probably like early summer, late spring.
Great.
That we're kind of at the whim of the utilities for actually turning them on, but at least the early sites we're working on don't have huge transmission upgrades or anything, so it should be pretty straightforward.
Julie, I'm going to pitch this question over to you because you mentioned these acronyms in your presentation. So Natalie is wondering if you can explain what IGS, MGS, and SCS mean. What do those terms mean, and how are they relevant to the different solar projects in South Portland?
Sure. They're just different size electrical accounts. So oftentimes a household will be in SGS accounts, but also if you have small, it's called a small general service account through CMP or Emera, medium general service account, and intermediate general service account. And the difference is that the small general service accounts, all of the charges are in kilowatt hours. And for the MGS and the IGS, the larger accounts, you have, again, this split charge where half of it is a demand charge. So the legislation that was passed really opened it up. Unless you're a really small municipality, you likely have some medium general service accounts. And so it just really opened it up for solar to be cost effective for municipalities.
Great. Nick, I'm going to pitch this next question to you. I'm not sure if you can answer this one. That might be another Ben question, but are there any maps or visuals that show access to the grid? How does one kind of find, how you can access the grid?
I do think Ben's the best person to answer that one. We have our habitat maps, but I don't know if they have grid connections on there. So,
all right, Ben, I'll pitch that one over to you.
Yeah.
Sure. I would say that prior to about a week ago, the answer was there aren't very many great maps, and we would find it by basically looking for substations on Google Earth and looking at Street View to see if there's three-phase power. But CMP actually just put out a really helpful interactive transmission and distribution map showing all of their three-phase circuits. I'm happy to send that link in the chat here. And I don't know if a similar one exists for Emera, but this is a good place to start. Oh, that's a long link. But yeah, basically they have an interactive grid map where you can go and pull up each individual spot and see if there's three-phase power and some information about the circuit. So that's a decent, and then secondly, I would look at the CMP interconnection queue, which will tell you how many other solar projects are currently proposed on that site. Because typically, it can be, you can have good transmission infrastructure, but there's already 10 megawatts of projects trying to tie in there. It's likely that you're going to be hit with a substation upgrade after that.
Great. Julie, I'm going to pitch this next question over to you, or maybe Gretchen, you can answer this one too. Question from Joe, who asks, if solar panels are damaged during the initial 6 years, who is responsible for the repair or the replacement cost? So, that's assuming sort of a power purchase agreement model where, the solar company owns them and then there's a buyout. But, Julie or Gretchen, could you answer that? Who's responsible for, repair and replacement if there's damage in those first 6 years?
Go ahead, Gretchen.
Okay, yeah, no, so in the first, at least with our power purchase agreement, it's all on revision. So when we signed it, we do maintenance. So we mow twice a year is what we've agreed to. But in terms of maintenance of the system itself, that is revision.
Great.
I'll just take a second to add on to that I think people worry about when you buy out the system, what are the operations and maintenance costs? And the solar panels themselves don't really have that many moving pieces, as Ben could probably attest to. And so we've built into our models that you will need to, over the life of the project, change out the inverters. But there's not, and I think the other thing, there's just not that much operations and maintenance. And so we build in a certain amount and we escalate it every year, but it's not a tremendous amount. And we will, as a municipality, likely not do that ourselves. We'll probably just sign a contract with a solar company to do our annual operations and maintenance. And the other thing people, I think, really worry about is vandalism, and we just haven't seen it in South Portland at all.
I would second that. It's been if anything, excitement and just questions about the process and how they can get solar on their property, and kind of referring them to certain people.
And I could just add one thing there. You know, Julie had mentioned that if the system, you know, if there's anything wrong with the system, it would be Revision or whoever the solar company's job to replace it. And I would say that if there is an event that, you know, destroys a lot of panels, a weather event, we have insurance for that. You know, like it's very, these projects are very heavily insured. So the same with vandalism. We haven't run into that issue on our projects, but if that did happen, then, you know, our insurance would cover that.
Yeah, there's a question in the chat, Ben, that I think you saw. You know, as climate change continues to get worse and we're seeing these sort of heavy precipitation events and sort of anticipating that, you know, weather could damage solar panels, you know, maybe thinking hail or thunder and lightning, you know, who's responsible for that repair? And, you know, certainly it would be the solar company.
As most likely the solar company's insurance company. And I would say that the, you know, panels are, you know, while they are glass, they are very strong. They're designed to withstand pretty significant hail. You know, if a hurricane or a tornado rips through, that's probably going to do some damage. But anything short of that is, you know, generally pretty good.
I think it was it last year that we had this really intense windstorm? I don't know if anyone remembers that. It was higher winds than we've seen in a while, and our landfill project, and so wind to me is the most likely and most significant threat, just in terms of the cables to the system, and it was fine.
And I want to say too quickly, you know, a lot of folks, even in Puerto Rico, is my understanding, you know, are turning to solar because it is more dependable than a utility that may or may not get to you in time, or et cetera, et cetera. And so there are certain benefits of getting off the grid and becoming on solar for your own home, because you are less tied at sometimes to weather events and things like that.
Yeah, and Gretchen and Julie, I'm going to stick with you too. And Gretchen, I'll have you jump in here first, since you're building on a landfill as well. The question is from Stephen Wood, who asks, how is methane collection conducted on a landfill sited solar project, you know, after the solar panels are installed? Are you still sort of capturing that methane on a capped landfill, or how does that work?
Yeah, so I would just say that the landfill kind of has stayed the same. So if there's been no impact to the system as a whole. So all of the pipes and the cap itself has been maintained. So like I was saying, they use the ballasted system. So they put gravel over top, as well as, you know, the aluminum gaskets, if you will, to maintain the system itself. And then the fencing around was not on the cap at all. So there was no impact to the system.
Yeah, and sticking with you, Julia and Gretchen, there's a question from Heinrich, who asks, are there independent consultants who can advise a town or do a feasibility study? So are there experts out there, you know, maybe experts that, you know, either Windham or South Portland worked with as they were building their solar projects? Did either of you kind of lean on an independent consultant, or?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of who did our geotechnical study.
While Julie finds that info, we used Revision as the towns. However, there are a plethora in Maine and elsewhere that are willing to help and able to help, as well as other organizations like GPCOG and the planning, you know, district that is, you know, they're willing to send you in the right direction.
There have also been a lot of municipal RFPs over the last year. Pretty easy to find them, and a lot of them are put together by consultants. I know Competitive Energy Services has done quite a few with municipalities. I know that there are others that aren't coming to me right now, but there are definitely options out there. But yeah.
I just looked in, and you can, any engineering firm can do the geotechnical assessment. I think TRC did ours. I've really, written into the RFP what kind of information we want and what kind of analysis we want to come back with the proposal.
Great, thank you. Ben, I'm going to put this next question to you. A question from Bart, who, because Ben, you mentioned in your presentation that you're sort of at the mercy of the utilities with some of your projects to get hooked up to the grid. So Bart asks, how long does it typically take for a solar project to obtain approval from CMP to connect into the grid?
Sure.
Is there a, what's the average time frame?
Yeah, I would say that for a a multi-megawatt kind of scale of solar project, the study process probably takes about 3 or 4 months from start to finish. Can be a little bit longer if you need to do any re-studies or further studies after the fact. But the way that utilities in Maine do it is that they do them sequentially on each substation. So if you're the first project to be studied, you get to file, you get studied immediately. If you're the third project to file, you have to wait until the first one study is complete and they sign the interconnection agreement or not. And then the second one goes through its study and then they sign it. And then the third one, then you don't start the clock until everything ahead of you has been resolved, basically.
Great. I got a couple questions here in the Q&A box about snow and ice buildup, both on how they impact solar panel output, but also solar panels that are ground mounted. How does snow and ice sort of affect those panels?
Sure. So clearly if there's snow covering your solar panel, it's not going to be producing energy. The panels heat up as the sun hits them. So typically, if even a small amount of the solar panel is exposed, enough sun will hit that to warm the panel enough that the snow will kind of slough off onto the ground. That obviously is more relevant when you have a little bit of snow. The low end of the panels are about 3 feet off the ground typically. So if you have more than 3 feet of snow accumulation, there's nowhere for it to go. So then it's basically a cost benefit analysis for the solar company on, is it worth it to go out and do snow removal? And, typically we'll put a couple extra gates in the fence around the panel so that we can shovel the snow out. That obviously costs money to do that, but then your project starts producing again. So it's often worth it.
For our solar landfill project, the panels did hold a bit of snow throughout the winter, but that was factored into the energy output model. And so they still produced within, I think 96% of the expected output.
Yeah, you also produce a lot less power in the dead of the winter because the sun's a lot lower in the sky, so it's less of an impact than you might think. If it lasts for months, then that's obviously a problem, but if it's a couple days before it melts, that's usually fine.
Right. Gretchen, I'm going to ask you this next question. Wondering, is there a certain amount of time that a landfill has to be, capped and closed and decommissioned before you can install solar on it? You or Julie might know that since you both have solar arrays on your landfills.
I'm actually not sure of that. Julie, do you happen to know?
No, I don't think that there's a certain amount of time. I mean, I think that would be a DEP question. I don't think that there's a certain amount of time. If it's closed and capped, then you can put a solar array on it. I think with our landfill, it's been closed and capped for so long that there's very little methane that's coming out of it. And so we don't have as many vents as we maybe originally needed to have. Mm-hmm. So that's one impact.
Great. This next question is about taxation of solar projects. Comes from Donna Dodge, who writes, I'm the chair of our planning board, and we recently accepted an application for a commercial solar project, and we're shocked to find out that the project is tax exempt and that the town will not be receiving any monetary benefit from taxing the project. What was the reasoning behind passing such a policy in Maine? I can speak to that just a little bit. This is one of the issues that we're hoping that the legislature will take up in 2021. We're pretty certain that there will be legislation introduced to fix this issue because I forgot to mention on the front end, I live in Winslow and I'm on the town's kind of solar committee. We're putting in a project at the local airport, and that's one of the things that, local folks around here were pretty surprised to learn that, these solar projects, aren't really subject to property tax. So it's one of the issues that we're hoping the legislature will take up in 2021 and fix that. Anybody else want to jump in on that?
I can speak. I can just add a little bit more context. I mean, the way, like, I also don't know why that bill was passed. It isn't something that the solar industry was really pushing for, as far as I know. But basically, when they passed they passed an exemption as part of the big solar bills last year. The way that it works in Maine is that whenever there's a state level tax exemption, 50% of the lost revenue to towns is paid for by the state. So the state will basically reimburse the town for 50% of the lost revenue. So they passed this tax exemption, but didn't set aside a pool of money to pay for that. So that's a major issue. So we were expecting there was a lot of talk about this back in like January and February about having a fixer bill at the beginning of the legislative session, and then the COVID pandemic hit, and that was not a priority. So I think the next legislative session is most likely going to be the issue. There seem to be talking about, at a minimum, doing basically a surcharge tax on solar to fund that tax exemption. Or maybe they just repeal that tax exemption. I'm not sure, but we want there to be. We as the solar industry want to pay taxes, because we want to be able to get projects through, and not, and if the town's not getting anything from it, they're much less likely to want a solar project. So we recognize that it's an issue.
Great. A couple questions in the chat having to do with, it looks like the lifetime for most of these solar projects is, 20, 30, 40 years. And of course, solar technology is always improving, and prices are always coming down. So there's a couple questions in here, about, if and when you might want to swap out the whole solar array to more efficient panels down the road. So not sure who wants to take that question on, but does it make sense, at some point during the life of the solar project to swap out to the newest and best solar technology?
Sure, I'm happy to take that one. Unless someone else wants to step in, but basically, yes, technology improves constantly, and the panels that we're installing today are more advanced than the panels that we installed last year, and we expect that the ones that are available in a couple of years are going to be even better. That said, each project is its own individual thing, and the reason that that's the case is that the way a solar project works is you pay a lot of money up front and then you make it back over time. So if you have spent, $5 million building a solar project on day one, you're not going to want to swap out the panels in year 3 of the project because you haven't made that money back yet. And the difference between the amount of production you would get is not going to be anywhere close to the fact that you still are, paying off this big investment that you made. And then, if you're talking about, the reason that the time frame is so wide on the back end is that solar panels don't really break; they'll just slowly degrade over time. But they typically have warranties of 20 years, but we expect that a lot of them will still be operating then. So if you're, in year 20, 25 of a solar project and it's fully paid off, yeah, the new panels are going to be way better, but you are generating power for basically nothing at that point because you fully paid off the array, and the ongoing operations and maintenance costs are very low. So it may make sense at some point, but I think most likely it's that you build it, generate power for 20 to 40 years, and then, build another one somewhere else a couple of years later instead of going back and retrofitting.
Great, and a similar follow-up question in the Q&A box that I'm seeing is, how much does the average solar panel, how much does its efficiency decrease over its lifespan? Are we talking like 5% or 50% or?
General rule of thumb is about 0.5 percentage point per year. That's generally the industry standard. So after 20 years, you're still operating at, over 80% efficiency. 85, something like that.
Great. So we do have just a couple more minutes for questions. So we got time for just a few more questions here. Ben, everyone wants you to play a song on your guitar. If you could grab your guitar off the wall and serenade us all, that'd be great. Maybe Here Comes the Sun. I don't know. I'm totally kidding. A couple of questions in here about recycling solar panels at the end of their life. Who's responsible for decommissioning and recycling, and what happens to solar panels, at the end of their life? So yeah. I think that's another Ben question.
I mean, they get recycled. There are recycling facilities available now that are specialized for solar, and we would bring them there and recycle them. I mean, they're definitely not going into the trash. It's reusable materials. They're silicon-based panels, so there aren't really heavy metals or anything really toxic in there. But there are specialty recycling places that will take them and break them down into glass and silicon and copper wiring and whatnot.
This is something that you should definitely, though, write into your contract. Yeah,
definitely. I would say almost all projects that we have, we do a decommissioning bond so that there's money there. If you trigger any state DEP permits in Maine, such as SLOTA, there's a requirement there that you have a bond. But certainly, it's industry standard to have, a bond or an escrow account for decommissioning based on actual, demo costs, so that there's money there on the back end.
Todd, pardon me, I have another meeting right now at 3:30 that I have to jump onto.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to say we're going to wrap up here. So thanks to all of our panelists for joining today, and thanks to everyone who tuned in. Just a couple of quick reminders. This webinar was recorded, and you'll get an email from me tomorrow with a link to share it with coworkers and friends and family. We hope that you do. Of course, SMPDC and GPCOG are both available to help your towns go solar. So please reach out to them and use the excellent resources at those two organizations. Thanks again to our panelists, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Bye.